Welcome to Cure America. I'm Star Parker. A few weeks ago, the new Poor People's Campaign announced a season of nonviolent, moral, direct action, in quotes, aimed at the U.S. Senate with some destructive activity, if you ask me, and disruptive activity at the offices of senators in various districts. Every single Monday, they were going to be doing this activity to culminate on August the 2nd. According to the campaign's co-chair, the Reverend William Barber II, in quotes, the Senate must end the filibuster, protect and expand voting rights, and pass a minimum wage of $15 an hour, unquote. Well, unfortunately, Reverend Barber is getting national attention. Even President Joe Biden recorded a video expressing his support. Concern about poverty is something we all share. Why are they supporting this type of effort that has nothing to do with poverty? What bothers me is that the factors driving poverty, according to research, not just of my organization, curepolicy.org, but many, many others, this research is being ignored by the Poor People's Campaign. And the issues on which they choose to focus either have nothing to do with the realities of poverty or actually make things worse. It may surprise Barber that the Senate filibuster is a powerful tool to protect minority interest. He is either confused or disingenuous when he claims that abolishing the Senate filibuster is about protecting democracy. This is not democracy that he cares about, but Democrats who now control the government. They want to be able to pass every piece of far left big government legislation that they want. You should see this long, massive list. Horrifying for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. The only thing that stands in the way of the liberals getting their way is the 60-vote requirement of the Senate filibuster. The history of our American democracy is that government changes hands all the time. When Republicans are running the show, and they will again, Barber will direct then his heavenly prayers to save the filibuster so the Democrats can prevent Republicans from doing whatever they want to do. It is the filibuster in the Senate that prevents passage of all these things that they want. You know, that For the People Act, the Voting and Election Reform legislation, House Resolution 1, that passed the House without a single Republican vote. So yes, it's sitting there in the Senate. Although H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, are being labeled as voting rights legislation, these bills address more than just voting, election laws. These bills are liberalism. These bills eviscerate actions that Republican states have moved on to reduce voter fraud, such as voter ID laws, stopping voter harvesting. I mean, my goodness, what in the world is wrong with Democrats that they don't think that people should have an ID to go vote? Of even bigger concern of millions of voters is that H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 also move the federal government into a host of all kinds of areas, such as defining political speech and the establishment of a federal elections commission. This is not federalism. States are where we should be doing all of this activity. The issue here is not to debate election law, but to ask what this has to do with poverty. And why is it such a priority for the Poor People's Campaign to get rid of filibuster and to pass Voting Rights Act if they're about poor people? In the current Congress, there are more than 60 African-American senators and House representatives. In 1964, there were 5. Per the Wall Street Journal, Jason Riley, in 70, nationwide, there were fewer than 1,500 black elected officials. Today, there are more than 10,000. There's little evidence that black poverty has persisted over the last half century because black Americans have not been able to accumulate political power or to express their vote on election day. In 2008 and in 2012 presidential elections, the percentage of black turnout was higher than white turnout. Yet in 2019, the average black poverty rate was more than 2.5 times higher than the white poverty rate. Regarding minimum wage, economic logic and economic facts show that the higher the minimum wage, the more low-wage jobs disappear. Raising the minimum wage is a great tool to make poverty worse, not better. What can make the difference? Well, the facts of the matter are that in 2019, the average poverty rate among American households was 9%, while the average poverty rate in Black households headed by a married couple was 6.4%. However, the average poverty rate for Black households headed by single women was 29.5%, and 41% of Black households are headed by single women. But the Poor People Campaign, they have nothing to say about this data, connecting family breakdown and abortion to poverty. Oh no, they disappear on those matters. If you look at the Poor People Campaign's website and their third construction agenda, it is radical. It's a radical plan that will not only hurt poor people, but it will link them to more reliance on government for their every need. This is horrible. So I think we should talk about it. We need to talk about the real issues affecting our poor communities today and how we can help them. We need to talk about the filibuster and what that means. So we're delighted to have two pastors it's our own network, two pastors from the Center for Urban Renewal and Education's Clergy program. They're going to talk about the Poor People's Campaign. We have Reverend Ken Fontenot. He's a pastor at Bethel Baptist Church in Wilson, North Carolina. He'll be one of my guests. And Wilson is like very rural. And then I also have Reverend Ceasar LeFlore. He's a pastor in the heart of Chicago. So we're looking at both sides of this question with our pastors. And then we're going to have our distinguished panel. They're policy experts and pundits, and we're going to help sort through the noise of the news so we can find some truth. We need to find truth. It's certainly not with the Poor People's Campaign. So let's get right into it right after this important message.
It's time for a cure. CURE is a coalition of new voices with new ideas that will become new policies. We are the CURE. The Center for Urban Renewal and Education, headquartered in Washington, D.C., CURE works with churches, political, and business leaders on behalf of urban communities. CURE's mission is to address issues of culture, race, and poverty from a Judeo-Christian perspective. CURE. Join with us. There has never been a better time to help Black communities.
The Poor People's Campaign is running around the country trying to shake down senators because they think the most important issue in the Black community and in poor communities is the filibuster or voting rights. We know otherwise. And so I have one of my very special pastors with us. As I told you in the opening, I was going to have Ceasar LeFlore again with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's always wonderful to be here with you.
Right out of the heart of Chicago.
Out of Chicago.
You can't get Chicago out of the headlines. And anytime you're going to talk about poverty and poor people, and what's broken down even politically, you can't leave Chicago out. So I really want to talk to you about this because what Reverend Barber is doing all across this country is an offense. You know, on the heels of Black Lives Matters, now they're trying to go into the Congress and force a discussion with the senators across the country, showing up at their doorsteps in their different states because they couldn't get in the Capitol here in Washington, D.C. Speak into this for us, especially coming out of just aggressive, just violence in Chicago.
Oh, absolutely. Well, things are out of control in Chicago, as it is in many cities across the country. And ironically, places where Democrats are already in control of almost every level of government institution. But in Chicago, it's out of control because we have a failure of leadership in all of the important places. We have a failure of leadership in our government institutions, in City Hall, the police department, the DA's office. We have a failure of leadership in the churches where true leadership is supposed to be coming through. And we have a massive failure of leadership in our homes. And right now we're focusing on the violence problem in Chicago because misguided leaders think the problem is guns. The problem with Chicago is
because you guys are gun free.
Right, and the problem is not guns. The problem is 13-year-olds roaming the streets at 2 a.m. It's a problem of parental leadership. And so Chicago is out of control as a natural outcome of chaos in government, chaos in leadership. The absence of leadership is driving Chicago down the toilet.
Well, the reason I wanted to talk to you and wanted to focus on Chicago, even though I'm sorry that it's the poster child for what's happening in the rest of the country. But we have an administration here in Washington that insists that the policies that are in Chicago and in these other cities that you're talking about need to be for the rest of the country. So my question is, how is it that you have people like this Reverend Barber get away with still promoting the same messaging in Black communities that are destroying these very communities, and they keep getting this type of traction? What are we not seeing? What are we doing so wrong that on our side we get little traction, but on their side they can go in shutting down different states continuously while we're seeing numbers of murder just escalate, numbers of robbery escalate, poor little lost 13-year-olds?
Well, at the risk of sounding cruel and insensitive, I look at people like Pastor Barber as being useful idiots for the Democrats, because they use these people in not concerned about the people they should be representing, but concerned about grabbing power through using these people. They take Black grievance and they hijack it, and they use it in order to be able to gain power and control over people.
Yeah, but how do they still get away with being able to do that? I mean, you have to get at a certain point that people can see that things are out of control. Why do they keep electing them?
Well, first of all, it's the messaging, because the media is controlling all of it. People only hear one message, one thing. So they're talking about misinformation.
Yeah, but they can see it.
But absolutely.
Like, what?
But it's being able to put the pieces together and connect it. So for instance, like we would say, those of us who pay attention, well, all of these cities that are failing are Democrat controlled. These are the policies that are failing the communities. These are the policies that's causing families to fall apart. These are the policies, these are the people who are pushing those policies. But somehow there's a disconnect. So we see the problem, but we don't see what's causing the problem to remain.
So then the people, because we have now almost 50 Congressional Black Caucus members coming from these districts. So the people in the grassroots that are electing these guys are not then connecting that what they're doing is making more of the same for them, and that's the reason that they're such.
And unfortunately, they haven't made the connection. And there's a lot of places where we need to be pushing this through. Once again, that's failure of leadership in the church. The church should
stay there for a while. Tell me about the failure of leadership in the church.
Absolutely. The church should be preaching biblical messages. And we know that what we're seeing now is antithetical to the biblical messages we have when it comes down to personal responsibility, when it comes down to family,
so
when it comes down to marriage.
Churches, whether it's in Chicago or other urban cores, and some of our rural, because we're going to be talking later with a pastor from the rural who's having some of these same challenges. So you're saying that at the core of it, you have pastors that should not be in the pulpits.
Absolutely. Let me just say, right, for Chicago especially, we have a very political group of pastors in Chicago. They're connected to the government because of what they can get from the government. So they're willing to make these concessions to the government. They're willing to be used by the government to go along with them to get the concessions that they want.
The concessions are money, prestige.
Building prestige, influence, and all these things. And so you do have a lot of people, I would say, who do not need to be in the pulpit. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They're only concerned about themselves. So they are religious pimps, they are poverty pimps, all the things, and they keep their tools for the establishment to keep people riled up and going in a certain direction.
Well, and they're keeping them riled up, and so are they sharing the wealth? I mean, how is it that then they still have momentum? These are the very large churches?
And once again, the people are disconnected. The people are blind, which is why, Star, you always hear me say about it.
Maybe they're working for government, because I've been looking at the numbers of how disproportionate African American middle class are to government types of jobs. So maybe this is a problem.
Well, absolutely. Most of the women who work are going downtown to work for one of the government agencies of this. But there's this disconnect, and I said there needs to be a spiritual awakening to make us aware of what's obvious in front of our faces. We should basically see clearly that these policies, these things are not working for us.
So how do you get to that? Because I only have a few more minutes, and I'm going to bring this up to my panel as well. How do we get to the place where the eyes are open? It seems like we've been doing a lot of, they're not doing, our eyes need to open. What do we need to do? What are we doing wrong? I mean, Cure has had a clergy program now for 20 years, and it doesn't seem to have the momentum that now today we're dealing with a Reverend Barber. Yesterday it was a Reverend Sharpton, and the day before it was a Reverend Jesse Jackson. How do we break into getting the prestige that's needed so that we can speak to those very people that say are blind?
I wish I had a short-term answer, but I think it's going to be a longer-term commitment. Is that we have to break the cycle of reproducing these robots of the state. So we have to get our kids out of, first of all, the failing educational system that's causing them because the educational system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work, and it's creating Marxists and leftists and all those. So we've got to break the cycle.
So first we got to break the cycle so that we get new information into the people. So you raise a new generation that actually
and then there has to be stronger voices who are speaking the truth unashamedly and unapologetically. People like you, more people who are willing to step up. And one of the challenges challenge is, especially for Black people, is that we don't want to seem like outcasts in our own community.
Right, that's
so,
true.
a lot of times Black conservatives, we're afraid because we're going to get the backlash.
Right.
So we've got to be bold. Right now, I'm beyond the point of being afraid of that.
Anymore. And so do you think that that's what's stopping a lot of pastors? Because we do have a network. We have about 500 on our list, but we don't hear from them. They want us to quiet down more often than not.
Yeah.
We know that there are a good 1,000 out there that haven't bowed to the Baal.
Absolutely.
How do you get the courage into those pastors?
Well, it's one of the things that I really appreciate about my association with CURE, because, we took this concept, what you guys give us, and we took it to Chicago, and we put together a table of pastors who found it encouraging that there were other pastors who thought and spoke like them.
Right.
And they didn't feel like they were alone.
Right,
so what we have to do, we have to find one another. Find more, and then to come together, the coalition together, the CURE Clergy Network is a perfect place for that, because you're not by yourself. There's thousands of us across the country who believe these things, and then there are also so much information. Just today.
Well, that's a thing. So much information. So I guess in the last minute I have with you, can we make a difference then? Because we are getting so much information, and I think that people are getting even frustrated to say, we're just getting more information, but it doesn't seem like we're making a difference. Are we making a difference?
But we are making a difference, because I was in Chicago in 1993. I thought I was the only Black conservative in the world. But I really did. I was on the south side of Chicago. I'm thinking, nobody else thinks like me. But now there's more of us. I've seen them coming. Donald Trump got more Black voting for him than I've seen in years. And so there are people waking up.
Now run underground, because it's like if you even go anywhere near that you thought that there was momentum with Donald Trump, you might lose everything, including your grandchildren. So,
but it's the principles.
People are whispering about it.
They're following the principles.
They are, and so you're hopeful then that
I'm very hopeful.
Turn around.
I'm very hopeful.
I tell you, I'm going to ask Pastor later on if he's hopeful as well, because we know that there's hope in Christ. But when you start really looking at these numbers, and especially as you're saying, 13-year-olds roaming the streets alone, we got to find our hope somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, I always tell people it's God's work. We only can work with God, what He's doing. God is setting the conditions where the contrast is clear, and so people are looking for hope.
Oh, now that's a good way to.
People are looking for hope.
So you think it's really dark just so people
the light shines brighter.
There's a light somewhere.
That's absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna take you on that one, and I'm hope that it's true. I'm gonna ask my panel about it too. Reverend LeFlore, thank you. I know that you spend so much time on these projects and these interests inside of your community. You work very closely with our CURE Clergy Center here.
Right.
And so we really, really appreciate all of that effort. And we're going to see, I'm going to talk to my panel and see if there's more difference that we can make, because the headlines don't look all that good. And even though I know that there's hope, there's always hope in the Lord. But I think we want to make a difference in that next generation. I don't like the idea that 13-year-olds are roaming the streets at 2 a.m. because there's nobody there to tell them how much they love them. So let's talk to our panel. Pastors are always very cool to interview with, because they tell us about the heart of the problem, especially Ceasar LeFlore. He's right there in Chicago. And so we have to talk about this Poor People campaign, because I don't see anything about poverty in that. And Diana was on me about my phone and all my stuff here and my glasses. And I'm like, I just need my stuff today, okay? Because the Poor People campaign is going to try to take everybody's stuff so that they can get the government to redistribute. And I don't like that idea at all. So Jonathan, I don't like that idea.
Yeah,
that's why I have to have my things around me. Now I'm going to keep them very, very up close and personal, because they're trying to take everything from us, including our passports. We can't even go flying anymore unless you have a vaccine with it. Oh, Lord have mercy. Jonathan Alexandre, you guys know him. He's an attorney, senior counsel for government affairs at Liberty Counsel Action.
Thanks so much for having me, Star.
You have to be here every week, because we have a lot of action. We're in trouble.
Yeah, things change by the hour. They're making up rules as they go along. It's up to us to keep up with it and let the population know this is what's at stake.
Yeah, it's true. And hopefully the population is saying, oh my gosh, there's a lot to say. And not so much that they can't consume and they turn it off. So that's why I like that you're back with us, Sarah. Sarah, many of you know Sarah already. Sarah Perry is a legal fellow at Heritage Foundation. She joined Heritage after serving for the Council for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, which is a good thing. And we've got some things that we're going to talk to you about at the Department of Education.
A lot of it's been rolled back now, but
yeah.
We did good work while we were there.
You did good work, but you know what? It opened the door for now new work, because people are getting exposed to what's going on, especially with critical race theory,
Absolutely.
what the LGBTQ had in mind. So we might see some real changes in the Department of Ed over the next time. But thank you for serving us as a society in that department and now over at Heritage. So appreciate that. And I want to hear your ideas on these Poor People campaign as they rally outside of different state houses, and then they're attempt to come here to Washington and shut things down. And that's why I needed you, Rick. I'm telling you, I'm so glad to see you back. Rick Manning, many of you know, is my personal friend because he co-authored my book, Necessary Noise. And he's also the president of Americans for Limited Government. They are dedicated to fighting for the survival of American principles. Limited government. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. This is an important conversation because so many of the things that are being brought forward were always hidden from the public. And now we're getting to see it full force, and people are going to get to make a decision.
You know, it's interesting that you would even say that because we were having a conversation here in the office. It's a think tank, so we think a lot and we brain dump a lot. And now we're going to put up big signs, don't over talk, because we yell a lot. But one of the discussions was about this overreach of government right now and how these same people that we're seeing complain, you know, a lot of the conservative complain, were in the colleges when they started this stuff in the 90s. And so one of the points that was made was that, well, remember in the 90s, we didn't have all these avenues to get things out. So there may have been people at Harvard and other places trying to tell of what was going on in those classrooms and just didn't have the outlet. So I appreciate that you would make that point because it's an important point. Now that we can know, we can do. And I think that, you know, when you think about the scripture, God's people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And we now have no excuse. Do we, Jonathan? We don't have an excuse.
I think you're absolutely right. It's plain as day. What was hidden has been revealed. I mean, the left and the progressive have definitely shown their hand. They've tipped us. This is exactly what we're doing, and they're out in the streets, you know, demonstrating and showing this is exactly the policies we'll put in place if you continue to put us in power.
Well, now we have this new Reverend. You know, it's enough that we had Reverend Jackson, then we have Reverend Sharpton, now we got Reverend Barber, who's insisting that he is revitalizing Dr. King's Poor People campaign, unfinished work of the 60s, which is, of course, they're calling it a third Reconstruction. It's just more big government. But their plan is to shut down the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. But they're the Poor People campaign. Rick, what does the filibuster have to do with poverty?
Well, first of all, so everybody knows, the filibuster is merely a procedure in the Senate that requires, in order for a bill to pass, it needs to get 60 supporters in the Senate. It kind of makes it so there has to be some level of bipartisanship in terms of getting anything done. And so that, and it's been the center of a lot of...
But not just bipartisanship because of Democrat, Republican, because I think it's a point...
Philosophical bipartisanship.
Yes, good, because I think that that's really important. It's one of the reasons we have 2 senators per state. Even the little states and the big old California states, they still only get little 2. And now you're telling me the filibuster means 60 people in that body must agree.
And 60 people who, and typically you're talking about, you know, it's a minimum of 30 states represented. And so you're creating the system is designed to make it so that the Senate actually serves the function that George Washington described it as being the cooling saucer. The House of Representatives was designed to be the place where people came in, we're going to do stuff, they won an election, they're going to come in, they're going to do stuff, they're there for 2 years. The Senate's designed to be a place where people can take a look at it, they can take a breath, they can figure out what's best for the country, and then presumably move ahead. And that's the whole purpose behind the filibuster. And as a result of that, you know, now the left is really aggressively trying to tear it down. They're trying to tear it down because they don't have a consensus in terms of any kind of changes in election laws. They don't have a consensus in terms of dramatically expanding the size and scope of government, in terms of the Green New Deal, in terms of their entire social agenda. There's no consensus. And what the Senate's meant to do with that filibuster is to make certain that a consensus forms in America prior to Washington imposing ideals on people.
That's interesting. So calm it down, calm it down. Then the lawyers in the room, I want to know that this new group is lobbying them, and they're not lobbying in the traditional sense. It's mob rule. They're standing outside their offices demanding that they get rid of a filibuster, which it sounds to me like the filibuster is for the minority. They keep saying that they're arguing, we want the poor people to have a voice. It sounds like the filibuster is their voice.
Yeah, in many respects it is. In fact, being the deliberative body that acts as Rick said, as sort of the cooling chamber on the hot-headed House of Representatives. We've been surprised looking at the Poor People's Campaign exactly how extensive the progressive wish list is. It doesn't just include, the abolition of the filibuster itself, but adoption of H.R. 1, which, as you know, is the For the People Act, which is really federalization of elections. It is also preventing environmental injustice. There are immigration reforms that are asked for, the 10% reduction in military spending.
Wait, before you move from even the immigration, let's let them know what that is. Open the borders, permanently.
It is truly.
And allow them to vote.
It is truly an expansive, progressive wish list, the kind of which we have not seen, and that's why they have the 95-member progressive House of Representatives caucus behind them in this effort, because they really think that they can use this groundswell, particularly on issues of race, among other things, and say, we're just going to force this kind of hard-headed reform without considering other interests.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Sarah, about the race factor, because this is what they're doing, the next step after George Floyd's Summer of Love last year, where we saw that destructive hand. Now, Jonathan, they're taking it to a whole new level. This is not a new group. This is us exposing an old group with the same philosophies of what we saw last summer, but these are the ones in the Congressional House. These are the ones, as Sarah just pointed out, that have relationships with the Congressional Black Caucus, with the progressive wing, and now they have put together a wish list that they're sneaking into bills. But the filibuster is just standing in their way. Where do we go?
Right. This is basically a choose your own adventure for them. They're deciding, making up the rules as they go along. This is what we want to push forward. And their tactics are aggressive tactics. It sounds like an insurrection to me, right? If you're getting kicked out and getting
they were arrested out there in Arizona.
Building, you know, it's basically the same thing. But that's exactly how they're going to push this. And they're running up against the filibuster, because the filibuster, as was mentioned, is there to bring consensus, agreement. You have 30 states that need to be in agreement. And if you look at a map, an electoral college map, you'll see it's a sea of red across the majority of the United States. And you only have pockets of liberal ideas, mainly on the coast. And so,
which is also rapidly changing, because a lot of the health in California, my home state, are moving on out. We're losing a congressional seat. People are saying we're finished with this. They're being exposed. Their left agenda is not really working. So I agree with you on that. But they're sneaking it in there.
One of the things, let's just deal with their language. They talk about it being a campaign for the poor. Well, let me tell you what's not a campaign for the poor. Spending so much money that we're in debt forever, and we have an inflation rate that has now gone from 1.6% under Trump to over 5% under Biden, and increasing every single month. Everybody knows that the prices at the pump, the prices in the gas station, or prices in the store, the prices for a new car, for a used car, are through the roof. So what does that mean? And for rent. So what does that mean? It means people who are wealthy can kind of dodge it a little, okay? We can adjust. People who are poor are the ones who are most negatively impacted by inflation. They're the ones who are killed by inflation, because they can't adjust their revenue, their spending.
But my concern is, as they're making these new decisions based on these new realities, all these political promises that will just give you more money. They're passing out all this money. And the threshold for who's poor has been risen to, now what is it, $150,000 now, you're going to get a child credit.
And they need that poor status, right? It's a communist agenda to keep folks thinking that, there's always someone richer than me, or there's always someone that has a better advantage than me, pitting Americans against each other based on economic differences. And so they need that populace to think, well, I'm being subverted, I'm being, put under oppression. And so that's why they are continuing to even use the name poor, rendering an individual to that permanent status.
Or that they don't even have voting right. Come on, we saw more black participation in the last election than ever in the history of the country. We've got more black officials elected than ever in the history of the country. This is almost foolishness, but yet every time we try to point out there's something else going on deeper, we're called conspiracists. And, we're sitting here in Washington, D.C. We know that now all of our mouths have been muzzled on whether it's the vaccine or whether it's what happened on January 6th. How do we let the public know that the agenda that they're buying into, because they are buying it. We're starting to hear now the numbers of people that say, well, I don't have a problem with more government. Oh, wow, I got a really good check. How do we let them know that there's a poison pill that you're pointing to, that this is not a good idea for your children, grandchildren?
I think what we need to do to start out with is take back the use of language. No one owns language like the left. They are very adept at manipulation.
Poor people campaign.
Absolutely. And words like inequality are thrown around, equity, justice. But when we come to the notion of equality, it's not only good government, it's good theology. I mean, we know the ground is level at the foot of the cross. I mean, everyone has an equal opportunity. But what the Democrats are very adroit at doing is manipulating terms so that they can win public consensus without factual basis. For example, the increation up to a $15 minimum wage.
That's one of the things they definitely want.
Congressional Budget Office says 1.4 to 2.7 million jobs gone with that kind of an increase.
Well, we saw that. You mentioned the environmental things that they want to do and what they keep telling us about oil and stopping the pipeline, and jobs just gone.
But environmental justice is another term that's kind of morphed. Environmental justice used to be there's a chemical plant that's put in the middle of a community that's a minority community, and it's dealing with the runoff from the chemical plant.
Right.
There is a consensus in America that the runoff, that there's a responsibility, corporate responsibility to deal with that.
That's right.
And there is a corporate responsibility. But but they're not changing it to being environmental justice is we don't want to have a pipeline that's going to bring oil, which is going to allow for people to pay lower gas prices.
That's right.
Somehow that's a campaign for the poor. That's not a campaign for the poor.
That's right.
That's a campaign for the rich elite who are effectively using their control to drive language which is directly opposite of what they're actually doing.
It is so true. In fact, Jonathan, one of my concerns on Richard's point is when the Supreme Court ruled that even now these corporations can go in and take your property. They expanded eminent domain. It used to be only if it were a social good for society.
And not even that, it used to have to be a public use, a government use. Now they're selling it and trading it to developers. So an individual that has beachfront property, and I think this was the Kelo case, beachfront property, well, your house is no longer yours because a developer can come in and put a boardwalk there. And that's completely inconsistent with the rights of property, completely inconsistent.
She fought it too.
Right.
That little woman fought that thing. I think it's called the Yellow House or the Pink House. And there's a little video if you guys want to know about it. No, she fought for her little house.
But she did.
But that's the sort of redistribution that she faced. That's the redistribution that if the Poor People's Campaign get their way is going to be consistent. And they'll pick winners and losers based on ideology, based on race, as long as that lasts. But they'll choose who they want to win.
Well, it seems to be lasting. I mean, I was saying to one of my friends that we need a biracial campaign. They need to get together and say, we're not getting any of these lines. But in the meantime, these ideas are making their way through the Congress. So after the break, I want us to talk about, I'm going to ask one of our rural pastors how it's impacting his community, but I want to talk about some solutions. What do we do to stop? Obviously, they're all connected to each other. How do we get them from not putting these things into law? And that's why this filibuster is so important, that issue. I'll be right back with a pastor that I think you're going to really appreciate, and then back to my panel. Well, that's a really heated discussion right there. But now I want to move a little bit to the rural side of life for those that are struggling with real poverty. I know the Poor People's Campaign thinks they're on poverty issues, but as you've heard, they're a little bit away from them. So my special guest pastor this particular segment is Pastor Ken Fontenot. He is from North Carolina, Wilson, North Carolina, and runs Bethel Baptist down there. So we just thank you for being here with me.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, it's interesting because I've actually spoken in your church, and the reaction even to my story was just very positive because I think people are really looking for solutions. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on when we have major organizations who are developing out of the whole mantra of Black Lives Matter to say that our problems are systemic, they're racist, they have nothing to do with individuals. Let's buy this idea of collectivism. And then on the ground, you see people just say, all I need is a little encouragement. What is it we should be thinking about when we're trying to solve real poverty problems?
Well, real poverty problems start with the individual. Because when a person changes, a family changes. When a family changes, a community changes. When a community changes, a state can change. And you can build motivation in the right direction. So take, for instance, your story. You're one individual that got the message. You took responsibility. And as a result, thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of lives are not the same because where Cure stands in the gap and says there is a way other than the welfare state.
Well, thank you for that, Pastor, and I appreciate it because I still believe in that. In fact, I believe that Christianity is not only unique to individuals, but as our lives touch, it helps change other people's lives. So what we're looking at now in situations like in North Carolina, Poor People Campaign came storming on the door of Senator Tillis pretending that the problem is in voter integrity. The problem is because of the filibuster. What do you say to a congregation that you're trying to keep them focused on where the real problems are so that they can try to fix them?
What I say is we need to not buy lies.
Okay.
Because when you get down to the Poor People's Campaign, it's nothing but left-wing agenda dressed in religious clothing. Unfortunately, the filibuster protects minorities. And you look at some of the other things that they're trying to drive home, these lies about systemic racism and all these other issues. America's a land of opportunity. There's no other place in the world I'd rather be black than in America. My family is low income. My dad died of alcoholism when I was 9. I come from a broken family as a result. Yet here I am. I have 7 college degrees. I was a captain in the United States Marine Corps. I was promoted 8 times in 8 years.
Wow.
I have 3 children with the same woman, and we're married, and we have a family, and we're changing communities. We don't need the Poor People's Campaign because all it does is enslave us and bring us back to Uncle Sam's plantation. We don't need to go there.
We don't. And when you're thinking about a state then like North Carolina, you're right in the heart of it. And one of the things that we addressed while we were there, especially when one of the congressmen's wives came to that particular meeting at the church, was school options and school choice. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in North Carolina to progress ideas to allow parents just to educate their own children if they want to.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have is school choice. In short, if your child belongs to a failing school district, you can have $4,200 transferred to a private school of your choice, which empowers, above all, African Americans for the most part. Because if you look at the failing schools, most of the time they're in black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Almost all of the time. So this allows African Americans to provide equitable, powerful education for their families. And school choice is critical to a free citizenry. It makes all the difference in the elevation that we could have over a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a phenomenal thing. I think even out of COVID, another thing that's developed is more African-American families seeing that, you know what, I can educate my child cheaper than the state can and better than the state can.
Yeah, we're seeing a whole lot of that. Then how does Reverend Barber, he's from your state, how does he get away? How does he get that traction to keep these lies going? And in particular, while you're trying to go against that stream to say, no, you guys, we do have options, and you're actually seeing results. I mean, I had a great time there at your church. So tell me, how do you counter that voice? What do we need to do to make sure that they're not the ones getting the headlines, that your senators like Tillis are not afraid of that voice when it shows up knocking at his door, that there is that alternative voice like your own and others that are following you?
Absolutely. What we do what Jesus said, be the light and the salt. You know, Senator Barber, or Mr. Barber, unfortunately, at this point in time is darkness because all he's doing is...
He calls himself a reverend, so I don't even know, does he have a church?
He has a church about 30 minutes away from me. Unfortunately, though, he's not preaching or teaching the Bible. You look at what he wants at the Poor People's Campaign, and his message is that the Democrats are a savior. But my question to Reverend Barber is, like, if the Democrats are a savior, why is Chicago burning? Why is D.C. having the violence it's having? Why is Houston, New Orleans, New York, democratically controlled cities? If you control those cities and you can't even run your own cities, what makes you think your ridiculous laws can save our nation? The truth is, it'll do to our nation what is done to Chicago. It'll make it dangerous. It'll continue to make black people impoverished and enslave us and take away our children and destroy the future of our families.
But now you see them getting traction with the Congressional Black Caucus, for instance. You have almost 50 members in there now, and they're allowing for all of these hearings continuously. Of course, they won't invite us because we keep saying, well, let our side of the story be heard too. If you're going to have hearings, there was one opportunity that CURE actually got to go into the hearing room while the Poor People's Campaign was on one side, and then we had 2 on our side and 6 on that side. But why is it that they're so afraid to allow for that other voice? Is it that they know that there's truth on the side of people like yourself, or is it just that they just like Marxism and don't want anybody else to have a
They don't want that voice because the proof's in the pudding. Take, for instance, my son Tyler. He's 10 years old. He's an entrepreneur. He's had a business for 2 years. He's 10 in the 5th grade, but he'll be in the 8th grade educationally, raised by me and my wife,
Yeah.
educated by us. And you know what's interesting? It costs us less than $500 a year to do what the government can't do in $10,000 a year. And we have the key ingredient of all, what God gave us, family.
Yeah.
We don't need more government. We need more family,
Yeah.
more men leading the home, and more men and women working together.
Right. I mentioned son. I remember he took over the policy summit a few years back. He was actually talking to our pastors about, here's what you guys need to do. So can we turn things around? Are you hopeful? We're here in Washington, and it's very dark, as you know. We're having real difficulty trying to get our voice heard in the middle of the Biden administration trying to transform our country. Is there hope?
Absolutely. The hope starts with the person in the camera. I think you exemplify that one person empowered by God and by His Spirit through the gospel of Jesus Christ is a majority. It's a force to be reckoned with, and it stands in the gap like Daniel stood in the gap, like Nehemiah stood in the gap, like Gideon stood in the gap, like Zerubbabel stood in the gap, like Joshua stood in the gap. The Bible shows us that, you know what? God only needs one.
Yeah, he needs only one, but then we have elections in this country, and your state is in the hot seat. Are we going to be able to keep the momentum going, not just with voices like my own, but other voices that are rising up in the states, in legislative officials? We do need public policy officials that are making good law. So what about North Carolina? Is it going to make a difference there?
I think so. And I say it starts with people like myself, yourself, running. Like, I mean, when I first ran into Cure 2 years ago, I ran for office.
Right.
I had $20,000 and 10 volunteers. We came up 400 votes short of a person who had $100,000 from G.K. Butterfield, her ex-husband, and 100 paid volunteers. And we came up with the 400 votes because I think the public wants an alternative to these lies. Mm-hmm. And I ran as an independent conservative at the time against a liberal Democrat who in our county was like 30,000 registered Democrats, which meant I had to take a lot of her side to my side because they want truth.
That's right. And you saw that truth. Okay, so I guess the question then is, in this last minute I have, are you going to do it again? I know the church is growing and things are going really well for you, but do you think you're going to take on the public policy world again? It's an opportunity to pass the kind of legislation that you have been exemplifying in your family and with your school options there and working with your congregation. What is the future holding for you, Pastor?
Well, in December of this year, we'll know because everything's going to be redistricted, and that'll show us what the opportunity looks like. So December of 2021, I'll have an answer because you're not the only one asking that. I get it all the time.
Oh, you are getting it all the time. Okay, well then I guess it means I'll have to have you back on. I'll have to have the pastor back on. For those of you that are wondering where his church is, right in the heart of the rural in North Carolina, and it's just a fantastic place. You're doing such an excellent job there. So I thank you for joining us here on Cure America, and let's see if we can solve some of the problems. I'll be right back with my panel after this.
It's time for a cure. Cure is a coalition of new voices with new ideas that will become new policies. We are the Cure, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., Cure works with churches, political, and business leaders on behalf of urban communities. Cure's mission is to address issues of culture, race, and poverty from a Judeo-Christian perspective. Cure, join with us. And there has never been a better time to help Black communities.
That's a little encouraging to hear a pastor might actually start running for office. We'll know by December. But in the meantime, we need pastors in the pulpit, but we do need some legitimate politicians too. And if they're going to be using reverends on the left, maybe we should put a few reverends on the right in high places. So I think you'd like that idea, wouldn't you, Jonathan?
I did. My dad's a pastor. Grandpa was a pastor. They'd be good men to lead this country.
I think so. I like Jonathan. You know, I like Jonathan. He's our attorney in-house, constitutional attorney at that, government affairs at Liberty Counsel Action. Sarah Perry's back with us, legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. She's really good on education reform. And we'll be talking to her a lot on education reform because we can't keep doing this with the left. And especially with what you guys are doing now at your school boards, Every now and then you got to just destroy a model and rebuild, and that's it. And so we don't need a Department of Education anymore. So thanks. Next time you're in there, make sure you start.
You got it. We'll start taking it apart piece
by piece. And so I think there was some effort in there, but it's challenging when you walk into a department like that. But I love Betsy DeVos. I'm so glad that she attempted to say, let's see what we can get positively done. So but then, like you say, then they come in and reverse it all. So Rick, that's why it's important that we keep the filibuster, that we keep the laws moving, because then they affect us all instead of trying to do it in department after department, executive order after executive order. So I like Rick Manning, president of Americans for Limited Government, and he just really wants liberty, and I appreciate that. So thank you. Yeah, we're doing another project together because they just got fires everywhere, and they're muzzling our mouths is the problem. And you and I are the project we're working on is that January 6th, which I'll talk to you guys about it probably next week. That they're muzzling the mouths of people. They're keeping Americans locked up for longer than they're supposed to be. They're taking away all of their constitutional rights because they're trying to make a political point.
Due process is important. It's important whether you're on the left or the right.
That's right.
And the fact that it's being broken down here in D.C. is really is a detriment and really plays into what some of the people on the left say American government is. They're turning American government into what they claim it is, and we can't allow that to occur.
Wow, now that's really interesting because that is exactly right. That is exactly, and every time we say, well, you're as a Marxist, you're coming. No, we're not. And then yet it's just getting smaller and smaller, more elite, and then you're going to do what we force you to do. So that's the reason that I wanted to address this Poor People campaign. What can we do to slow them down before they get movement like that Black Lives Matters? People thought that started overnight. Or like the critical race theory. I mean, that's been going on since the 70s, and now all of a sudden we're trying to put the fire out. Well, these Poor People campaign people, Reverend Barber and his little sidekick, have a real harsh agenda that they're sneaking in little places, and yet they want the filibuster gone. Are they going to be successful, and what can we do to stop their momentum?
Well, I think they're playing a game for 4 years, 5 years out. It's making normalizing crazy, and by normalizing crazy in 5 years, it becomes the mainstream. And so that's what that's where they're. We've seen that occur time and again. And in terms of, there's a couple of things that people can do though. Okay. This is really important. You can't allow, just say, I don't know where that's coming from. It's so crazy. There's no reason to respond to it. We have to make certain that the elected officials at all levels of government understand why some of the things they're talking about don't work, why they actually have the reverse effect on poor people. Why when you create an inflation rate that's 5, 6, 7, 10%, that has dramatically more harm to poor people than it does to the rest of America. That's first of all. Second of all, when they try to talk about environmental justice, simple. The environmental justice is not paying $5 a gallon at the pump.
That's right.
It's not saying the only people who can have a car, people who can afford to buy a Tesla. Right. That's not environmental justice, because an ability to drive a car is the ability to have a job.
That's right.
And so when you take away that ability to drive a car, the ability to have that freedom of mobility, you're taking away people's ability to build their own lives.
So we have to fight that.
So we have to fight it on a philosophical level and beat them on a philosophical level. But we also make sure that politicians understand that the political push is against this, not in favor of it. So they don't sneak it in.
And I agree 100% with you, but where we run into trouble, even here at CURE, because we do what you're saying, are the politicians on the right that say that they represent interests of the right. They're so timid. When these Poor People campaign are in there demanding their reparations and having their little hearings on this and our guys won't even put people on the panel opposite them. What's going on, Sarah?
I think a lot of people are going to be surprised when there's a significant sea change in 2022. I think some of us are very hopeful that midterms are going to portend a real elimination of this giant foothold that the Dems have both in the House of Representatives and to a smaller extent in the Senate. We need people who are willing to stand up against liberal agendas. And it's part of the reason our Progressive Caucus is so big.
It is, and the Black Caucus. But I don't see that activity out of the Freedom Caucus, for instance, anymore. Right. Or the people that were saying, we're just going to replace them. One more election. We heard that in the 90s. We heard that again in the Tea Party wave. And yet they get here, and I don't see hearings changing. I don't even see us trying to make the case that Rick was saying. I don't see that aggressive activity, even when you say, I've just elected a real firebrand for my district. Right. Is that the only answer we can come up with?
I think you're absolutely right. And even when it comes to electing individuals, this Poor People's campaign is trying to change election laws so much that they'll nullify any state legislature that puts a valid election law. If they're trying to clean their voter rolls, if they're trying to make sure that only folks that are alive and legal are voting. That's what they're pushing back against. So, before we even have the conversation of who's on the ballot, make sure that the votes that are counted towards that good individual that are on the ballot are there. But this Poor People's campaign is doing the exact opposite as they're pushing HR1 and S1.
Okay, you meant yes. That's where I was going, and didn't mean to interrupt you before you said HR1. It was in my mind. Is that then why aren't Republicans more strategic to maybe put voter integrity into that John Lewis Act.
Well, I think there are individual states that are doing that. But
the states are doing it, but these people are trying to change federal law. They're trying to get rid of the filibuster so they can pass H.R. 1 and federal law.
The challenge with the John Lewis Act in particular is it gives carte blanche authority to the Department of Justice to decide what the law is.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so even filibuster by putting stuff in.
But yes, there are poison pills that you can stick in that some people on the left wouldn't vote for. The problem is any law which gives the federal government more ability to usurp the state law in terms of elections, and in modern times, 2021, is designed to loosen election criteria, not increase, make sure there's more election certainty.
That's right.
And so what the Republicans have to do, in my estimation, is they have to stand up and make the case. Don't allow them to be cowed by people saying who are playing behind words that people like. They have to stand
John
up.
Lewis, just the name itself. Nobody
They placed his name. The bill didn't have his name until after he died, and they do that to say if you disagree with this, then you're fighting the same thing. You're the same person that John Lewis was fighting against. You're akin to the KKK
you're
the
sitting
Jim
there
proponents.
Attacking them walking across the Selma Bridge.
Exactly.
That's the reason.
Which is so disingenuous, but it makes Republicans timid. They don't want to go up against it.
Nicole Hannah-Jones, author of the 1619 Project, has said openly that Black Lives Matter and 1619 operate on white guilt. Right. No progressive, white, moderate, or white Democrat wants to be seen as a racist. And I think because that plays so significantly, we need to take back, as we talked before, the language about equality, not inequity, but equality.
But how? I mean, you're saying that we need to take back. You're saying we need to take back. Well, I mean, you're in the courts taking back.
I'll tell you very simply, you put your head on the nail. We need the people who are elected as leaders, who have real platforms, to be standing up and saying, this is nonsense. America is the land of equality. America is the land of opportunity. When you try to redefine what that means to being equal outcomes rather than equal opportunity, you're creating a land that is one where the government dictates outcomes, and that isn't freedom. Unless we have people who have platforms saying that, and that's what we're hoping will happen. Why I've emphasized talking to your politicians, because the politicians have to get a spine. If they don't know why they're in office, if they don't know how to do that, find somebody else.
And I'll say also, we talked about education a little bit before, not federalized spending, but local spending on education, educational choice, give people the opportunity to go to charter schools, to go to private schools, to give them the alternate perspective that they need so that they are learning the truth about the nation's founding, what critical race theory actually is, Marxist leadership, the truth about Selma. They're learning it from an accurate historical perspective. I love what I'm seeing out of local school boards. People are finally having it with local representation, and they're saying
against them.
The mask is off. We now know what's happening behind the scenes.
I would say to Richard's point on the platforms, a senator can't wait until it's a filibuster vote. You don't have the text in front of you as has occurred on this infrastructure bill. You don't know what you're voting against and expect to cast a vote. This has to be the people's common language so that the platforms of the individuals that they're raising up, this becomes common. And what they're raising up is that we're opposed to government expansion, that we're opposed to our elections being stolen. Republicans and the populists can't be afraid of saying that. What we saw in the 2020 election cannot be consistent, but what the Democrats are doing through this Poor People's Campaign is trying to cement
or unraveling what we're seeing in other nations. I mean, South Africa, Cuba, we have even examples to point to. But wait, before you do your point, because I'm not wondering, are you saying then to define it before, the terms before, like infrastructure sounds good. You're saying the politicians should say, but here's why this bill isn't?
Yeah, you had 17 Republicans joining this infrastructure bill that adds human infrastructure, which is such a nebulous and frankly a creepy term that says the government is literally going to be building individuals up. I mean, that is not the role of government, but if you're waiting till a Senate vote where you don't have the text in front of you to join in and call against this, you're already late to the punch. The Poor People's Campaign is so much ahead of us.
Oh, no, they're way ahead of us. That's why I want to expose them. That's why I thank you guys for helping me expose them, because most people, they're like, who are they? We don't know about them yet. But
yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
You're saying the bully pulpit, though.
The bully
Get out
pulpit.
there and use that.
And it isn't even scary politically now, because the people who've been leading against the Marxist critical race theory in the schools are at the local level. The people who've been leading on the entire election reform and election integrity are at the local level. It isn't the federal level that's leading, and that's the way it ought to be.
Yeah.
All we need is the people in Washington, D.C. to get on board the train and start fighting the way the people back home are fighting.
Well, if the people back home are fighting to that degree, and we are seeing that they are, then are you hopeful? Is this a good place that we're in?
Yes.
That even though it's very, very dark, those people are going to come in 2022 and make sure that their vote, as much as it might not count, they're going to try to make it count, will be for people that have their same interests?
Yeah, and I have to say, as the mother of 3 school-age children, if the pandemic offered any consolation to us, it's that we had an up-close and personal realization of what was being taught in our schools. I have written more letters to my local school board. I am the parent no one wants to hear from because I am always making a nuisance of myself, but it's given us an opportunity to see what it looks like at the ground level. And Rick's exactly right. These revolts are being led by local mothers and fathers, local school boards, and that's how the national government ought to work. They need to take some of that strength of character and implement it at the federal level.
In the meantime, can we do it in the courts? Are we going to be able to see more activity in the courts, whether it's fighting the Department of Education for filing lawsuits against some of these guys, the mask mandates, all of these things? Is that a place
I think you're absolutely right. Anytime you're fighting against government control, anytime you're supporting these audits that are now happening in states against the stolen election that there was, anytime you have a legal avenue that's backing up what the people are doing on the ground, I think we're going in a good direction.
And are you seeing some of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Some of the cases, our phones
are ringing off the hook, and we're continuing to work around the clock. First, it was reopening churches. Now it's folks saying, well, Joe Biden can't tell me what to do in terms of putting things in my body and vaccinations. I'm tired of wearing this mask. University students getting kicked out of their last year of college because they're not, wearing the mask or getting jabbed. These are things that Americans are just saying now, wait a minute. And that's the spirit of liberty that we need to.
Fast to move from, come on, guys, this is helping folks, to, come on, guys, you better do it.
2 weeks to flatten the curve. 2 weeks to flatten the curve to you have to get vaccinated, otherwise we're going to deny you all ability to make a living or get an education.
No, you're 14 days, 14 months. It's you better.
Right.
Yeah.
Or else.
This is not hopeful. Okay, we got to go back.
But I'm going to give you the hope. I'm going to give you the hope.
Pushback. The hopeful point is that there is pushback. Our phones are ringing off the hook because folks aren't satisfied with this.
Hurry up,
I will. The hopeful part is that people back home are paying attention. People back home at the local level are taking control of their schools, are demanding their schools perform, and that's taking care of their children, and that grows into national. National imposition down doesn't work.
Nope.
Bottom up works.
Bottom up works.
Get involved.
Yeah.
Well, we're here in Washington, D.C. trying to do it on national level too, but you're absolutely right. You guys have the opportunity to do it right there in your own district, in your own home, so I'm glad that you're with us. I have some final thoughts after I let my panel go, but thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rick, because I think that it is kind of hopeful. We still are a free country to a certain degree. We have elections to a certain degree, so let's exercise that for a little bit. And the Poor People Campaign, well, they're exposed now for sure. I'll be right back. Well, I hope you enjoyed another interesting Cure America with some thought-provoking ideas, things that we really need to discuss. Just as a people, we need to discuss these ideas and these imaginations, because when Dr. Martin Luther King originally launched the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, he was looking for a middle ground. He was about a nonviolent movement. His ultimate goal was for freedom, independence, and self-determination. This Reverend Barber stuff, I mean, come on, they're out there getting arrested in front of offices now. This current version of the campaign led by this Reverend William Barber, it calls for civil disobedience and a radical alteration of our society. And yeah, I know Dr. King had civil disobedience involved in his movement, but he was looking for truth. He was not trying to destroy the country. He was looking for the country to live up to its ideals. This campaign wants the federal government to control our lives, all of our income, redistribute wealth in the name of equity by establishing new social welfare programs, expanding benefits, guaranteeing income, higher wages. This is not the role of government. These are not the remedies for the poor in America. These are not the remedies for poverty around the world. So I'm so glad that many Americans do understand that there is a connection in the poverty rate and the breakdown in family. And I'm so glad that there's a society out there that has become more and more involved in making sure that secularism is not the law of the land. Too many have turned away from God and are turning toward government to provide for all of their needs. It's not the way to help the poor. We know how to help the poor. Christian people are called to do this work and are doing this work. We understand the private sector. All across this country, you got decent people in quiet communities doing the most amazing work for the Lord. One of my favorites are the work of the pregnancy care centers, to be there for that moment in her time of need. But expanding government only diminishes freedom. We have to have a successful country. And success is when individuals can live individual lives based on what God has given them to do with that little bit of time they have on this side of eternity to fulfill their purpose. This is not for government. This is for us. And we hope that the senators get this message and ignore the bogus claims of the Poor People's Campaign. That's it for this episode. I hope you'll join me again next week here on Cure America. And if you want more information about these issues and go more into the policy solutions that we think about here at Cure, then visit our website, curepolicy.org. Thanks for joining us here, and I will see you again next week.